Okay, so what tools will it take to fight the escalating threat from extremists? Are we, as the Prime Minister suggested, at war with jihadists? Joining me now from Toronto is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Roxanne James. Jinny Sims is the NDP Employment and Social Development Critic in Vancouver tonight, and in Regina, Ralph Goodale, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. Thanks to you all for being here. Allow me to say Happy New Year to you, if we can still do that.
Happy New Year to you too.
Let's start with this very serious topic, and let's start primarily, Roxanne James, if we can, with what the Prime Minister said yesterday, that we can expect this new anti-terror legislation soon. I would point out that the government has been saying this since October. If this is so critical to our fight against terrorism, why has it taken so long?
Well, I think, Rosie, as the Prime Minister had indicated yesterday, what we're seeing right now is jihadist movement, war against countries like ours, like Canada, like France, like-minded countries that believe in democracy, freedom, that share values of openness and tolerance. And what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a movement across the world against nations such as ours. And I think it's important to note that that is one of the reasons why our government has acted. We've actually, as you know, we stood firm against ISIL in Iraq, and we have joined the coalition to conduct airstrikes against ISIL, as well as to support the Iraqi forces there as well. That is why we are bringing forward measures, as the Prime Minister indicated, as the earliest possible with regards to our national security. We need to bring in new measures with regards to surveillance, detention, and arrest. Yeah. We absolutely have to do this.
But Ms. James, my question was quite specific. If that were true, if we do desperately need these anti-terrorism measures, further tools for police, why did we not move to do that after the shooting on Parliament Hill in October, as the Minister then suggested? Why are we still in January waiting for something?
As you know, Rosie, we actually brought forward legislation. It was in the works prior to the terrorist attack that happened in Ottawa and against our Canadian Armed Forces. That legislation, the Protection of Canada from Terrorists Act, has gone through committee, and I'm hoping to see that passed as soon as possible. It is legislation that is put into place to ensure that our security agencies have the ability to track security threats, not only here in Canada, but outside of our borders as well. That's one of the measures that we've done. Of course, we've done a number of things over the last number of years. This new piece of legislation, it is clear that we have been working on this. Obviously, we're not going to be reactive. We need to make sure that the proper measures are in place, and we will make sure that the Canadian public, that we need to make sure that the security of our country, of our borders, is paramount in this piece of legislation.
Okay, so let's get the others, bring the others in here. Jinny Sims, what do you think we need to see in this legislation that you know, we've been hearing about now since the fall, and the Prime Minister suggests will come, I guess, within weeks of Parliament returning?
First of all, let me say, Rosie, our hearts go out to the families and our friends and the French people as they've gone through the horrific experiences over the last few days. And, you know, this government has a habit of announcing legislations, and we've got C-44 in the House right now, and it needs some work done on it, and we're looking forward to doing that. But also we've got to make sure that absolutely security of Canadians has to be paramount. But we also hear from Canadians at the same time as we're giving more powers to CSIS, we have to take a look at more civilian oversight as well. And we also have to make sure that we don't just do the talk of saying we're giving you more power, but at the same time don't give those agencies the resources they need. Over the last 3 years they've had cuts, and if you keep taking away resources, how can they even do what is within their mandate right now?
Yeah.
But you know, security is paramount. Canadians are worried. And once again, we need to make evidence-based decisions. We were pleased that the government looked at some groups that they have established to do some studies on some of the causes of radicalization, and we're hoping they will take the time to get those results and then make informed policies.
Okay, and we will talk about that issue of resources, because it actually was raised by the RCMP and CSIS both in front of a committee. But Ralph Goodale, let you get in there as well. Do you think that this is an issue of needing more legislation, more counterterrorism tools, or is it something else?
Well, if more legislative power is required, it is the onus is on the government to make that technical case, to show where new or different powers would actually make a difference in dealing with these very serious and deadly kinds of situations. And certainly if a proposal is brought forward that this law needs to be changed or that provision needs to be strengthened, we'll take a very close look at it. The government did bring forward legislation to renew some measures that were put in the law back in 2002. Yeah. And we supported the government in that regard. Whether they need more now is something for them to justify. But the issue of adequate resources to enforce the laws that presently exist is a critically important issue. Because the having more laws on the books that you don't have the resources to enforce really doesn't move you very far ahead. Right. So it's not just a question of what's in the law, it's a question of whether the resources are adequate, and it is also a question of proper civilian and parliamentary oversight. Sure. We had a measure before Parliament before Christmas to create a parliamentary oversight arrangement like virtually every other country in the world has, and for some reason the government voted against it. I think it would give Canadians more confidence that the approach is in fact balanced if the civilian and parliamentary oversight measures were stronger.
Let me get to the issue of resources if I can, because what seems to have become clear already with the situation in France is that at least two of these gentlemen, the brothers, the suspects, were being monitored to some extent by French intelligence, and yet this still happened. We know certainly that we have a watch list here in Canada, and yet have struggled with our own incidents. So let me show you this clip, if I can, from back in the fall of Mr. Paulson and a gentleman from CSIS talking about some of the issues around resources, and then we can get into it. Take a listen.
Every extremist that we prevent from going overseas to engage in extremist activity is one more individual that we have to investigate closely because they're radicalized to the point where they want to leave. Saying all of that, there's nothing more that we can do with the budget that we have except to prioritize internally as effectively as we can, and I think we're doing that.
Suggestions, people saying on our high-risk travelers, why don't you just put surveillance on them all, 24 hours a day? You know, okay, but there's not going to be anybody else doing anything else.
So my apologies for the issue with the translation that was over top of the English clip off the top there. But Roxanne James, if the government goes ahead with this new piece of legislation, the Prime Minister seems to suggest that is going to happen, will there also be money attached to it? Because both of these people, but from the RCMP and CSIS, these are the guys doing the work, say they can't get it done with what they have.
Actually, that's not exactly what they said, Rosie, but as
well, they said that they need more.
This is legislation that's going to be coming to Parliament very soon. Obviously I can't talk about the contents of that legislation. It has not yet been tabled in the House. But I would like to go back to something that both of my colleagues have indicated. When it comes to measures implemented by the government with regards to terrorism, whether it's stripping citizenship from those that are convicted of terrorism, whether it's making it a criminal offense to go overseas to engage in terrorist activity or training, I will let you know, Rosie, that neither of the opposition parties voted for it. So when it comes to terrorism, and I'm sitting here on this panel, I'm hearing my colleague from the NDP talk about terrorism and we need to bring in legislation. There hasn't been a piece of legislation that the NDP has been able to support. But I just want to be clear. What is happening right now is we need to take a strong stance. We need to take a strong stance against terrorism, against jihadist movements, against the war that has been against the countries that are, we need to stand up absolutely for the freedom and democracy of our Canadian people.
To be fair, Ms. James, strong stance. My question is, that's fine for language. I guess the question is, what does that mean? You're saying it means further legislation. Obviously, we're not going to get the details here today. I understand that. But in that clip, to be clear, Mr. Paulson actually said that if we're going to put all our high-risk travelers on monitor 24 hours a day, there's not going to be anybody left doing anything else. So I would take that to mean that he needs more people. So if you're telling me you're going to put legislation in place but not going to give the police any way to do anything, I'm not sure how strong a stance that is.
The Commissioner also indicated that they prioritize what's most critical at that point in time. Again, the legislation will be forthcoming. I really can't comment on that here. It has not been tabled in the House. But we need to make sure that we do enact legislation that will provide the appropriate tools for law enforcement, for the RCMP, for security agencies, to be able to better surveillance, better detention abilities, and better abilities to make arrests. We need to make sure that what is going on and what has happened in France, these barbaric acts of terrorism, that we need to send a clear message that we will not be intimidated, first of all, and second of all, that we are taking clear action to degrade the threat of terrorism here in this country, and we will stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies around the world on this issue.
Okay, so let me ask both your colleagues, just to wrap up, Jinny Sims and Ralph Goodale, do you agree with the Prime Minister's comments that we are now, that jihadis are essentially at war with countries like ours that hold our values to a certain level? Jinny Sims?
I think that what I'm hearing loud and clear from the Parliamentary Secretary is not making a commitment about the additional resources that are going to be needed. And of course we have to take on the threats of terrorism and ensure security. But let me tell you, Rosie, in my community in Surrey, BC, the Muslim leadership has taken an amazingly proactive approach at dealing and addressing some of the radicalization issues. And we're hoping that this government will take action in an informed way and also will bring in policies that will actually work. This is the time for us as parliamentarians to do the hard work, but do it in consultation with experts who know how to ensure safety. But we can do all the talking in the world, but unless we put the resources in, it's not going to happen. And I heard very clearly the RCMP officer saying that if they were to just put, to survey those people they've already targeted, they'd have nobody left to do anything else.
Okay, Ralph Goodale, last word to you. And are you comfortable with the language that the Prime Minister used there about jihadis being at war with Canada and our allies?
Well, obviously the world is facing very serious global security threats, and they have to be treated and reacted to in a serious way. It's fine to say you're going to take a strong stand, but if you can't get the tools out of your toolkit because you can't afford to use them, then you haven't taken a stand at all. It's all rhetorical, and there's no substance to it. When Mr. Paulson said he had to move 200 officers out of white-collar crime into security issues last fall, that obviously indicates that the force is under-resourced. You have to have the resources. And secondly, in dealing with this, let's not treat these criminals as martyrs. They want to be martyrs. They want to be put on a pedestal fighting for some greater cause. Well, it's not a greater cause. They are criminals. You have to bring the full force of the law to bear against them, sensible rules, and you have to have the resources behind those rules to make them real so you can enforce the law, and you have to have civilian oversight to make sure that A, the police forces are doing their work, and B, human rights and civil liberties are properly respected.
I'll give you 10 seconds there, Roxanne James, to respond there.
Just with a comment on civil liberties, I'd like to stress that without strong national security, we will have no civil liberties. We need to ensure that we respect the rights of Canadians right across this country, but we also need to make sure that the protection of Canadians is paramount. It's the #1 priority of any responsible government, and that is precisely what we are planning to do.
Okay, thank you all for coming in.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, and appreciate hearing from you after what's been a difficult week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Roxanne James.